Hi, today we're going to talk about section 3 of chapter 7 of Savitch book, edition 10. So I broke down in a couple of parts. The first part that I want to talk about is partially filled arrays. So we already seen arrays. We already know how to pass arrays into the function. If you don't know those things, you need to go back and look at those videos before we get to this one. So this is specifically for partially filled arrays. So why are we talking about this? Let's just start with the beginning of this, that we have to practice on this one, that whenever we want to declare an array, we're going to need a size for it. So before we do use an array, we need the size for it. So we learn how to pass this into the function. So let's say that we worked on max function for our last week work. And in there, you put your array with no parameters, with no numbers in it, and then you pass the size. And then you use that default array size, or whatever you want to call it, as a number for creating your array. Now, the reason that we did this, just a reminder, is we are putting it as a default value in this case, just on an option. So that means that I can call this max function with one parameter that's going to receive this default value. And then I can call it with two parameters that can have different number in there. So if I don't want it 12, I can put something else in there, and so we can have a different numbers. Now, the problem is going to come in that I have to know the size of my array before I start my program. Of course, this is in changing. We have some dynamic arrays that we're going to expose to some of them in this class and the rest of them in your next class. So what is going to come up is I may not know exactly what size do I need, or my size might change as I'm working around. So let's say I want to create a list of students in my classroom. How many do I need? If I am at the beginning of the course, I'm going to have 30 students in my course, or maybe I have a few more that I want to add to the class. If I set my array to 30, then I cannot add anybody to the class. Let's move on to later on in the class. Some people drop the class. Now the size of array is not 30 anymore. Maybe it's 26, maybe it's 18. It's going to be smaller. Now what we're going to do? That's where we're going to come up with we're going to be talking about partially filled arrays. So when I'm building my array for my students in a classroom, I'm going to think about what is the highest size I can have. Maybe double of the students. So if I have 30, maybe 60 is the highest one I can have. Maybe 70. I cannot have 2,000 students. So we're going to have some kind of a limit for it. And then we're going to use that as my starting point. And then I keep track of how many elements do I have in this array. So if I initially set my array size to 70, and at the time I have 20 students, then I'm going to use just that 20 parts of it. I don't need to use the rest of it. So in this case, I have an array of what size? What do you think is the size of my array? The size of array index 0 to 9, the size is going to be what? 10. And then how many of them I have used? If my last size, my last index is 4, my number used, or whatever we want to call it, is going to be 5 in this case. So even though I have 10 for my array, I'm only going to use, I'm using it 5 right now. So that's my concern. So I don't want to go beyond this because I don't even know what kind of a data is in there. Remember, C++ basic does not initialize my array. So I don't know what it is in after this in 5 through 9. So that's going to cause some issues. So we're going to be looking at the display 7.9, which is going to be looking at this thing. So we're going to be looking at 3 functions here. Let me get my arrows. Okay, so we are going to have 3 functions we want to go through. One is called fill array. We're going to ask user for certain number, I'm going to fill it. We're going to have compute the average to find the average for that. And we're going to do the show difference. Now, for the fill array, you can see that I have the size and it's going to return the number used. So if I clear this out, so my precondition is size is declared size of the array A. So I need the size and I need the array to come into this function, and how many number I'm going to be used is going to come out. So I'm going to need the size because I want to be sure I'm not going to fall off of end of my array. But how many number I'm going to use, I'm going to bring it back out of this function. From that point on, in my example, I would have like 5 elements filled up. So from this point on, I'm not using size anymore. I'm going to be using number used. So this function that I'm computing average, I am passing number used. In the previous section, you were passing the size of the array. So if you wanted to find the max, or you wanted to find the average or minimum of an array, you would use it from the beginning to the end of the array. Here, we're going to be passing the number used, how many number we have. So from the point of view of this function, it doesn't know how big is your array. It's going to say to itself that this array is going to end here in number used. So in this function and the following function, it thinks that the array ends right here. It doesn't know, it doesn't care what's going to be the rest of the array. So that's what we're going to be using here. And when we are calling, we're going to call fill array like this. And we're going to get to more detail of what we're doing in here. So let me clear this thing out. And then we're going to go to the next one. So this is my fill array. Let's look at the fill array, which is a display 7.9. So what we're doing in fill array is we're going to pass an array, we're going to pass a size, and we're going to return a number used. So we're going to ask the user, enter this many. Remember, we are not using any hard-coded numbers because if we are using a constant global variable or any constant, remember the size is coming in. So that from the point of view of this function, it doesn't care what the size is. You can give me any size you want. You give me 10, I'm going to ask the user to enter up to 10 number. If you give me 50, I'm going to ask the user to enter up to 50. In this one, in this fill array, it's going to stop at the negative number. So it's going to ask you to enter up to 10 number terminated by negative number. So that means what? We're going to be checking 2 conditions. One is the number that I'm getting from the user is positive, and the other one is it's not going to go outside of my array. So I'm checking two things over here. One is my index is not going outside of my array, and two is my number is positive. I'm going to start my index with 0, and then I'm going to add 1 to it as I go along. I could put this plus plus right here. It would work the same. If I want to save myself a line, I could say index plus plus less than size. Remember, plus plus is going to happen after we do it. So it would do this comparison, and then it's going to add 1 to it. And we are going to put the whatever we have. Remember, we did a cin over here. So we read something. We're going to put that one in the array of index 0. We started with 0. And then we add the index 1. And then we're going to read the next. And we're going to stay here till we get the size. So two conditions is going to happen. Either a user is going to put negative number, or we're going to get to the end of it. So if I'm asking the user for 10 number and the user puts 12 numbers, I'm going to stop at 10. That's all room I have. And if it puts some number, put a negative number in there, let's say puts 5 numbers and a negative number, then it's going to stop this loop too. It's going to put the index into the number used. The reason it's doing that because the number used is going to get out of this function. So number used is called by reference. So when I put the index into number used, it's going to return that one for me. The next part is we are doing the compute average. When we're doing the comparative average, it's receiving an array and it's receiving a size. We are calling it number used because we know the array has more room than this one. So in our case, we have array of 10, but we have only 5 elements. But from the point of view of this function, it doesn't know what's happening after 5. It's looking at it as an array that has 5 elements. That's the way this function is going to be looking at. So what it's going to do is going to go through that 5 elements by using a typical for loop for arrays that we start with 0, we go less than what we have. So this 5 is going to go 0 to 4. And then that's a typical way of doing our iterate through our array. And we are calculating the total and we are checking. So we're going to go through this, we're going to do the total. Why are we checking to see if number of used is greater than 0? Is it possible that the number used is 0? So in fill array, we are asking the user to give us a positive number and terminate with a negative number. What about if the user puts the first number as a negative number? So I am not going to have any elements in my array. So this number used is going to be 0. And if I don't check it, I'm going to be dividing by a 0 here, which is going to cause me a problem. That's why we are doing this thinking when we are doing the design for our problem. We just don't stop writing code. We just got to check these things out. Okay, so we are doing total divided by number used. That's going to be my average that we're going to return it in here. Now, what about if it's going to be 0? We're going to print an error message and we're going to return 0. Generally, we don't print anything here because we don't know where this function is going to be used, if it's in GUI or something, but that's okay. We can just let it go for now. So if I have some number, I'm going to give you an average of those. If I don't have any number, I'm just going to return 0. So this function can potentially return 0 if I don't have any elements in it. So that has to be clearly communicated through the comments, that this function will return 0 if cannot figure out the average for any reason. The other one is called the show difference. So in here, it has the average. It wants to show the difference for the average. So we have an work from last week that is asking for the average, difference average. So we had for the rainfall, we had the actual, we had the average, and we would have the difference. So we're going through the whole thing and we're comparing our elements with our, we're not comparing, we are actually subtracting our numbers from the average, and we're going to display them. So we're going to go through the loop, again, typical loop for our array. We start with 0, we go to less than size, and then we just go through it and do whatever we need to do. And this is going to be the display. So one of the question is, why don't we just use the max number score? You guys asked this before, that we have constant global max number score equal 10. We use this to create our array. Why don't we just use this one inside the function instead of passing it as a parameter? So these are two reasons that we want to do that. One is we can just basically say to the people who are going to be using this that we are passing the size for it. So that's going to be clear. And the second one is, if we use this max number score inside our function, this function has dependency to that global variable. So moving this function to other places, other programs, might cause some issues. So those are the two reasons that we are doing this. So all right, so I'm going to stop right here for the first part, and I want you to think about this thing. So we may have some time in the class to go over this, or you can practice on it. That we're going to be doing function definition, so you can pause the recording right now, play with this. You have questions, and send it to the DQ. Let's talk about it. And that's just a little practice of what we're talking about.